Coming up on this episode of Greyhound Nation, John talks with guests Jennifer Ng and Michele Houghton about amateur greyhound racing. Find out how you can get involved with this fun sport for your greyhound. Keep listening. The Nation is next. This is Greyhound Nation, Episode 20, recorded July 22nd, 2021. Amateur racing for your greyhound. Greyhound Nation is a podcast for greyhound enthusiasts produced by greyhound enthusiasts. To learn more about our show and its hosts, visit our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Greyhound Nation podcast. I'm Michael Burns. Now, here's your host, John Parker.
Welcome back, Greyhound lovers. Today we've got an important subject to talk about, one of the two running sports that I think is going to be very important to the future of at least the American Greyhound segment of the breed, and that's amateur racing. That, along with lure coursing, I think may be the way in which we test our American Greyhounds in the coming years. And today, to talk about amateur racing, both forms, straight racing and oval racing, we've got two longtime racing enthusiasts, Michele Houghton and Jennifer Ng. Welcome, ladies.
Welcome. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's jump right in with a little bit about your backgrounds. Michele, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your time in Greyhounds and in amateur racing.
Well, I got started in Greyhounds in 1991 and got active immediately with my group. In 92, I opened my own kennel. And at that time, there were several tracks in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts. So I had a huge kennel. I went from promising I would only hold 4 to ending up with a 40-dog kennel. And immediately, I think my first lure coursing experience was in 92. And so I did that passionately with several dogs. And then in 1998, I discovered racing, amateur racing. So, and gave up lure coursing, mostly where I live in New England. It's just so difficult to find really decent fields, big open fields. Really tough hay fields are used. Just hard for greyhounds, not so bad for smaller dogs, but the big fast dogs. So I did get sick of the injuries and racing. I mean, of course, I think track greyhounds, sometimes I would describe them as too much engine and not enough frame. But I am addicted to that speed. So I pretty much have stuck with amateur racing and have done quite well and have bred 5 homebred litters of NGA dogs, 4 sport, 4 amateur racing, and 1 professional litter. So I'm still active and I do travel quite a bit, mostly down to New Jersey, or if there's nationals, pretty far for that. So I've also participated one time in open field coursing in Wyoming. So that's my long-term experience. We have a club in New Hampshire. We're a small club, but we put on anywhere from 4 to 6, 7 meets a year, just of straight racing, LGRA, Large Greyhound Racing Association, because it's just so difficult to find a decent field for a good NOTRA track, a good oval track. So we do stick with straight racing.
Yeah. And you're active in greyhound adoption as well, aren't you?
I still have a kennel. This is my 30th year of placing greyhounds, and we did, after racing left New England, we did slow down. We went from a 40-dog kennel down to 20-dog kennel. And then when I moved to Dover, I can hold 24 in my kennel, but have tried to keep my numbers down until Florida closed, and then, inundated during 2019 and 2020. And I have placed my last Florida dog, and I am thinking of semi-retirement, and much to begging of my family and friends. I am old, but I board a lot, actually. I board a lot of greyhounds in my greyhound kennel. So
Yeah,
I generally
yeah,
still have a lot of greyhounds, and I own a lot of greyhounds. So
yeah. But Jennifer, let's go over to you. I should formally say Dr. Ng. First and foremost, I think you're best known as a veterinarian, but you're also a racing enthusiast. So tell us a little bit about your background in greyhounds and amateur racing.
So I adopted my first retired racing greyhound in 2007, and shortly after kind of got involved with anything local I could find when it came to amateur sports. I didn't do a whole lot of traveling at the time, mostly stayed within probably a 3 to 4 hours drive radius. But I did a little bit of lure coursing, amateur straight racing, amateur oval racing with her, just a little bit of everything. And I kind of got lucky with my first adoptee. She excelled. She did not do very well at the professional track. I got her right around 2 years old, but she actually excelled at all of the amateur sports that we tried, got her championship titles in all three venues. And we pretty much just did it for fun, and the titles were just icing on the cake. I got involved with the local club that held events about 30 minutes from where I lived in Camden, South Carolina. And in 2010, I actually took over as president of that club, Sighthounds on the Lamb. We do both amateur straight racing, LGRA and WRA, which is the whippet side of things, as well as NOTRA for all breeds. We do 4 weekends a year. It's 2 of those weekends are straight racing both days. 2 of those weekends are straight on Saturday, oval, the NOTRA on Sunday. And after 10 years of leading that club, I actually stepped down as president last year and turned it over. I am still actively involved in the club. I'm still an officer, but I stepped down from the main leadership position. Over the years, I've been involved with the amateur racing with other retired racers that I have either adopted or brought home from the track. And I've also gotten involved with more of the whippet side too. So I kind of do a little bit of everything. And right now, I in the beginning, I'd mentioned with my first greyhound, I did a little bit of lure coursing. Since I got into the whippets, I've pretty much focused completely on the racing. And with both the whippets and the greyhounds, I've traveled pretty much all up and down the East Coast to meets in New Jersey, Delaware, Indiana, Ohio. And a lot of it is I would say the whippet side is a lot more competitive. The greyhound side of it is probably a little bit more for fun, with a lot of people just coming out with retired racers, not traveling as much and not doing it quite as seriously. But with both sides, the dogs love it. I mean, we love it, and it's a lot of fun. No money involved at all, just ribbons and toys for the most part.
And bragging rights.
Yeah, that's right. Jennifer, you bred some litters, a couple of litters as well, haven't you?
I bred 1 litter of racing greyhounds for the professional track, and the mom of the litter was one of my racers. And then when this was right around the time that Florida was getting ready to close, so they pretty much all retired right at the end of last year, and I brought all 5 of the puppies home temporarily, and then 2 of them went to friends who are also active in amateur racing, and I kept 3 of them. So the 2 of the 3 are the ones I'm actually competing with a little bit now. The third was the one that kind of flunked out of race training and never raced either professionally or in the amateur side.
Do you think you'll keep up with the breeding, if not for the professional track, for amateur sports?
I'm leaving that option open. It's a lot of work. The litter of Greyhound puppies was actually raised on a farm since they were slated for professional racing. I bred a litter of racing whippets at my house, and they actually just turned 3 years old, and they're the ones that I'm competing with right now. I kept 2 out of that litter. But given the amount of work and time that went into raising the litter while also working full time as a vet, it's probably going to be a couple years before I'm ready for another litter.
Very good. All right, let's get into the organizations a little bit, and let's talk first about NOTRA, the National Oval Track Racing Association. I believe it came before the straight racing organization. So, Jennifer, tell us a little bit about the history and structure of NOTRA.
So this was obviously a little bit before my time, but from what I gather, the organization was originally started by a couple of whippet racing enthusiasts and clubs back in 1975. And between 75 to the early 80s, there were a handful of meets that were pretty much just whippets. The first meet where other breeds got involved, I believe it was Afghans, Borzoi, and Greyhounds, was in 1983. And then a few clubs that were actually primarily other breeds got more involved later in the 80s. So it kind of started off more as a whippet sport with more of the other breeds joining in later. And from what I read, the whippet clubs require a starting box. And at some point in, I believe, the late 80s, early 90s, they actually allowed the other breeds to have hand slip starts if a starting box was not available. And they actually got a lot more involvement after that point, although the starting box is always the preferred start method.
And is it, I guess this actually would pertain to LGRA, the straight racing organization as well. Is it an all volunteer organization, or is it more like the NGA with paid employees and that sort of thing?
It's completely volunteer.
Yeah.
From the organization itself
Yeah.
to running the meets and organizing, it's all volunteer based.
Yeah, it's one of those situations. So many people are jack of all trades, you know.
Yeah. Okay, very good. And then Michele, over to you for the large Greyhound Racing Association, which is the straight racing organization.
Right. In 1995, Jack Lewis, who lived in Utah and hosted whippet racing, Dominique de Caprona, who owns Sluggies, went out to try it. And from there, Jack himself wrote a rule book and started the organization. And it just exploded from 95 to 99. Just the numbers just tripled. Other breeds got involved. I'm not sure where once that became established, I'm not quite sure where the next meet were or who got involved, but a lot of people, whippet clubs a lot of times would invite people to come to a LGRA meet. And a lot of clubs, and I believe still do dual meets between WRA and LGRA. We don't anymore in New England. We just do straight all breed, big breed, or O breed, other breed as we're called. But it did explode. And I think on the East Coast up our way in New Jersey, I think Garden State Sighthound, which was a pretty big club of lure coursing, NOTRA, and did the first. And at that time, I was with Gone Lure Coursing Club, Greyhounds of New England, that Ann Nichols, Doug Bolin, and myself had started. And so I was lucky enough to, because of my involvement with the tracks, Seabrook gave me their schooling box, which was a beater and is still a beater, and we still use it. But we're lucky enough to have a volunteer that has kept it in good repair. And the joy of that box for moving is that you can crank it up on wheels and load it up on the trailer so much easier than than the other types of boxes. But anyway, so we had a Gone. We raced for Gone. We raced with Gone. We had the program, but we soon it was mostly Greyhound people, and what we discovered after a while are lore crossing people that would come out with great enthusiasm. And they're, especially if I'm not talking Greyhounds, I'm talking different types of other breeds, Ridgebacks, and those particularly come to mind, really had an issue with boxing. But we really felt, those of us that were doing the work and putting the meat on and had Greyhounds, really felt like it was really an important part of racing, and that there just was the only way you could have a truly fair start. So we stuck with that. But what we did discover was a lot of the people that did well in lore coursing would discover that their dogs weren't as fast as other dogs were. And I meant this in all breeds, not just Greyhounds. So that was an eye opener for me. But anyway, so we left Gone and we started Granite State Greyhounds. And that's for the last 20 years, what we've, maybe 18 to 20 years anyway, that we've been having our meets. And it waxes and wanes as far as turnout goes. But the advantage that I have for Greyhounds is having a great audience to try and hook people with, my adoptees, so to speak, my adopters. And how we do that is we just invite them to come out for a fun run, just to see what it's about. And we try to be sociable. We have a big potluck, homemade food. We're lucky enough to have electricity at our race meet, and we really, invite people to have a fun run and then to sit around for a lunch and get to know, get to ask questions. So it's worked out pretty well. We're still a small club, but we have so many volunteers, and we have all sorts of all breed dogs come out for fun runs. So that keeps us going.
Yeah, that sounds great. What currently, I don't, you probably don't have these figures at the tip of your fingers, but which organization do you think runs more dogs, LGRA or NOTRA?
I think it depends on what part of the country you're in.
Yeah. Overall, do you have a national feel about national entries?
No, again, that really waxes and wanes too, I think.
Yeah.
It's very cyclical. Especially a lot of people, probably more so in Greyhounds than any breed, dogs don't run until they're 8 years old. I mean, that's just the fact of owning Greyhounds, especially if you have a really fast dog.
Yeah.
The injury rate, I have to admit, I hate to, but the injury rate is not as high as, or at least I found with my personal dogs, even not as high as in lore coursing, but they still, they still drop a hind muscle, they still break toes, they, still burn their pads. So you do have to live with that. But I have found that people, even in all breeds, people age out, their dogs age out, their life changes. So it is a constant, I think, with population in all the dog sports. A constant.
Yeah. How about in the Southeast, Jennifer? What do you find about the LGRA and NOTRA?
It kind of depends on the breed. I know we're talking more Greyhounds. From what I've seen in our area, it seems like we tend to get more Greyhounds in the straight racing and LGRA. It's a shorter distance, less strenuous since it doesn't have the turn. And I think it's a little bit easier for some of these pet owners who don't have a way to really keep their dogs in tip-top shape. I think the LGRA is a little more forgiving.
Yeah. Well, and also in New England anyway, we have a problem finding a decent field for NOTRA. I love NOTRA, and when we were using some decent fields down in New Jersey, I did a lot of it successfully, but the the field that we use in New Jersey now, I just don't like it. It's not a good field. It's not a good setup. And I've broken too many dogs. So I'm just, taking a break from NOTRA until we start finding either a new field or a better field.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that physical setup aspect of the two forms. First, distances. What are the distances, Jennifer, in LGRA and NOTRA?
So LGRA is a 200-yard straight. NOTRA varies depending on where it's set up, which club, because it has multiple track layouts for clubs to choose from. And they range, I think the shortest that most clubs use is 270, although I believe there is a 220 in the rule book. I've never seen that one used. And they can go up as high as 440, but again, I've never seen that distance at any of the meets I've gone to. I think the largest is the 350. It's 300 meters.
Excuse me for interrupting. Several years ago, there was a field that we, Garden State, which is no longer in existence, used in Colts Neck, New Jersey. And we did a 440, and it was awesome. It was a great field. It was a wonderful setup. And now I think, but at that time, the club was also doing a dual meet with Whippets, and they were not happy about the 440. So we only did it once or twice, but I loved it. I prefer the 350 modified, the 350 meter modified. That's to me the safest. But it's hard to, again, you have to have the right field to set it up.
Yeah. So, and that speaking of the surfaces that are run on and the facilities that are used, I assume this is all grass or mostly grass.
Yeah.
Mostly. So the majority are set up on grass fields. Like our club runs on a polo field, and I know other clubs use polo fields as well because they're well maintained, flat, grassy areas. There was one NOTRA track that was run in Florida on an actual Greyhound training track. So it was on a sand surface with the rail lure, just like in professional racing. And that was a facility that we had the fortune to use because of connections with Greyhound racing. But since Florida shut down last year, we no longer have access to that.
Yeah, that's where I took ours amateur racing. We really enjoyed that, a Whippet and Greyhounds. What's become of that track, Jennifer? Any idea?
From what I understand, the property has been sold and they've already taken down the track.
Yeah, that's too bad. That's a shame.
We're lucky in one sense that our main field is on a lovely old setting. It's a private airstrip that the owner keeps mowed for, of course, for his airplanes, but it's pretty private. It's on a kind of a back road, horsey farm type road, and the field is kept at a good length. The only problem is, like all of them, sometimes, during a drought, it dries out and is pretty tough on there. It's in the middle of a hayfield.
Yeah. And then what's the equipment in terms of the lure? What form does the lure take in LGRA and in NOTRA? I'll throw that out to either one of you.
Well, in LGRA, we have a pelt with a predator call in it. And of course, it's straight drag. And we use a regular, Ford starter motor. I will say LGRA is not as tough on equipment as lure coursing is, for sure, and even not as tough as NOTRA. But because it is a drag and it doesn't have any pulleys to go around, we can have a nice fat pelt with a nice fat predator call that's oh so attractive to those dogs.
And in NOTRA, we mostly use plastic bags, similar to lure coursing. Oftentimes they'll tie a strip of pelt to it for a little additional interest, but you really can't get
in New Jersey, we use fresh bunny ears.
But yeah, you can't get much more bulky than that and still go around the pulley.
Right.
With if you're not running on like an actual Greyhound track, the majority of these are dragged on a line across the ground, and the pulleys are what kind of makes it curve.
And how is the track laid out, Jennifer, especially in NOTRA? Is the grass a different length, or can you tell, what's used to actually create the track space?
Usually you have to rely on the field being mowed by whoever's maintaining the field. And so with the polo field that we use, we always let them know ahead of time what weekends we're going to be there. And they usually mow it sometime the week prior, so that the grass is at a good length when we go out. We usually go out on a Friday afternoon right before the meet to actually set up. And with both LGRA and NOTRA, there's like the fence that kind of defines the track is just set up with plastic stakes or wooden stakes and flagging tape ribbon that we just put out. And it's, put up just for that weekend. We take it down at the end of the meet. So it's just a very temporary setup. And
Michele, you alluded in your bio to the use of starting boxes. Obviously, that does provide the most even start. What percent of clubs would you say use starting boxes?
On the East Coast, in my world, every club uses starting boxes. We do allow, because ours are schooling boxes, professional schooling boxes from the track. We do allow like Irish Wolfhounds to hand slip, or some Deerhounds to hand slip if they want, but everything else is boxed. However, there are some boxes that are made for the bigger breeds. Ours is a Greyhound box, and Jennifer, I think yours is too, isn't it?
Yeah, ours is the same one you have. You actually helped us get ours.
Yeah, I remember that.
So
are these boxes built by the same companies that build them for the professional tracks?
The ones our club have are, because we actually got them from Greyhound Tracks.
Yeah.
It's the one we got what it was like probably around 2013, 2014.
Yeah,
I think
it was a while ago.
Yeah, it was when the track in Boston closed, and Michele put our club in touch with the people there because they were looking to sell their training box.
Yeah. So
we actually purchased that box, and getting it shipped to South Carolina was actually the biggest expense.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a Greyhound box. It's got 4 holes, and NOTRA just runs 4 dogs at a time, so it's perfect.
Yeah.
And it's easy to move, like Michele was saying earlier. It cranks up on wheels, and we can roll it from one location to the next. Pretty sturdy. We've had to do a little bit of maintaining since it's metal. Some of the springs and the parts will rust and wear out.
Yeah.
So we've had to do a little maintenance on it, but it's been working great.
Well, Jennifer, you alluded to the 4 dog races, and that's true in both LGRA and NOTRA.
Yeah.
A total, no more than 4, and I suppose depending on the entry, you may have 3 or 2 or whatever it may be. And then let's talk a little bit about the number of races. I know they're called programs in amateur racing. What's the setup in that regard?
So
same for both. Yeah.
Dog also always runs 3. We run 3 programs.
Yeah.
And the initial setup is if it's a dog that has run before, the national organization keeps track of the points. And what they call a weighted average is what's used to determine what race the dog starts in. So if you have an entry of more than 4, and there's going to be more than 1 race, then the slower dogs will run together, the faster dogs will run together, and then those get rearranged with each race based on their performance in the first race. So it's kind of unweighted, where the dogs that run better will get grouped together. So at the end of the 3 programs, you usually have the faster dogs competing with each other, and then the slower dogs in what we call the lower point races.
What's the typical rest time between races for the dog for any given breed?
Oh, it depends on the size of the meet. You might have a full hour or even longer. or you might have 20 minutes. It just really depends on how many races are running.
Yeah.
But it's usually a pretty good rest period.
Is there any mandated minimum rest time?
I don't remember, but
I
I
don't
want to say
think-
most of the Whippet clubs try to do a minimum of 30 minutes, even if it's a fast meet. But I don't remember if that's actually stipulated in the rule book or not.
But sometimes what I've discovered is if something happens in a race, like say the lure breaks halfway down, or something goes on that the race doesn't finish, is I will prefer to walk my dogs out and then let them run while they're still warm, they're not exhausted, they haven't run a full way. So I'll walk my dogs out while they're just to cool them, get their respirations down a little bit, but they're still warmed up. So sometimes I just as soon let them run right away.
Yeah, yeah. What's the how long a day is a typical race meet? What time do you start in the morning, and what's your typical finish time in the afternoon?
It depends on the number of entries.
Yeah.
With my club in South Carolina, we run both Whippets and other breeds. So sometimes that makes for some pretty long meets. If we've got big entries, we usually start registration, what we call roll call, is usually about 8:30 in the morning. The racing will start usually between 9:30, and sometimes we're running until 4 or 5 p.m. if it's a really big meet. If it's a smaller meet with fewer entries, we may be done by 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Same.
Is there a season? Is there a time of the year that you don't run at all?
Well, for
Probably
us,
different between the Southeast and the Northeast.
yeah, for sure. For us, occasionally New Jersey would, depending, of course, on weather, New Jersey might in the beginning of December have some races, but we usually end around Thanksgiving. And a lot of times that's really still pretty damn cold. But then again, New Jersey is, well, my drive is generally minimum 7 hours. So, I can leave in snow and still run in New Jersey sometimes. The weather is often that much different. But yeah, I would say we start generally in April in New Jersey. Sometimes we start in March. But now in New Hampshire, we start in either April or May and go to November.
How about in the Southeast, Jennifer?
In the Southeast, it's opposite because it's too hot to do much in the summers down here. So we usually start in October, and we'll have a meet. Sometimes we'll do November, December, and then we'll do a couple more meets in the early spring. And then we usually don't do, like, our last meet's usually late March.
Yeah.
There's one club that's run in April on the same field, but nothing after that.
We do have a mid-June meet, and that can be a little warm sometimes. But fortunately, we have water. We can hose it. We have water and electricity, so we can hose them down.
What do the Greyhounds wear when they race?
Sexy
in the way of
muscle
equipment.
shirts.
What's that, Michelle?
Sexy muscle shirts. Yeah, just numbered blankets. Yeah.
And do they use the same colors, the standard colors on the amateur track as they do on the professional track? I think number one is red, and
I think they actually do.
Yeah.
And then you wear muzzles. Well,
Yeah.
the Greyhounds do.
Yeah. You don't have to wear. I use racing muzzles. You don't have to. You can use the kennel turnout muzzles if you want. But all dogs, every breed has to be muzzled. Okay.
And tell us a little bit about the officials. What kind of officials do you have? What are the various jobs of the race committee?
They're pretty much the same for both sports. You have your box operator, and if you have enough people, you have an assistant who's usually your foul judge. And then in the middle of the straight track, you have your lure operator, and across from your lure operator, you have another foul judge. And then at the finish line, one on each side directly, your finish line judges are directly on the line, not before or after. And for high point races, hopefully you can have two judges on each side, one standing, one sitting, and another foul judge.
Now, you obviously don't have the photo finish equipment that you would have at a professional track. What percentage of clubs use a video camera or a phone even to video the end of the race?
They are allowed, and some clubs do have those, but there is a specific, they have to be at a specific height and angle, I believe. We don't have one.
Yeah, I haven't been to enough different meets to get a feel for percentage. I do get the impression that the finish line camera is more popular among the Whippet groups.
Yeah.
Because the Whippet straight racing, WRA, runs 6 dogs at a time. So they can have some very close finishes with several dogs crossing the line altogether. So the camera comes in handy. And some of those clubs, if they're running other breeds, then the camera will get used for the other breeds as well.
Now, what happens in the Greyhound races if you have a very close finish and the two judges, the line judges, disagree? How is that resolved?
They tie them.
Ah.
Yeah.
So it's considered a dead heat.
Yeah.
And even with a camera, I've seen dead heats happen. So just like on the professional track.
Yeah.
What are fouls? What constitutes a foul?
Well, it all depends on who you talk to, even though there are very strict rules. I think the reason there's more than one foul judge is to call it a foul, you have to have at least two judges, whether it's the box in the middle or the middle and the, and it's hard to, that's why you need 3 at different places, because it can really, you can miss it. It all depends at what angle you see it from, you know? I've seen fouls when I'm up on the ladder running the lure. I've seen obvious fouls that nobody else sees, but I'm at a different angle again, you know?
Yeah.
So retaliation is not a foul. Growling is not a foul. Even bumping, because especially with greyhounds, sometimes, you know, they're so intense, they're just jockeying for position.
What's the old saying? Racing is rubbing.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of jockeying for position, maybe even probably more on NOTRA even than in LGRA, you know. But yeah, so you have to have at least 2 judges agree that there's a foul.
And I would say that the foul is essentially intentional interference.
Intentional, yeah.
Like one dog impeding the progress of the other dog. And the rules kind of specify like what constitutes a foul or not, but it can be hard sometimes to tell.
Yeah.
Is the turning of the head alone a foul?
No.
No.
You have to make contact or impede the progress of the other dog?
Yeah. Or obviously go at the dog, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Because sometimes inexperienced dogs, new dogs and novice dogs will be startled if they have a dog come up close beside them, or, you know, and start to pass, and they might turn and look. I've seen that quite a bit.
Yeah. What does it take to qualify for a greyhound to get involved in LGRA and NOTRA? What do they have to do in the way of showing their abilities and so forth?
Go
Jennifer,
ahead.
I'll throw that one to you.
Yes, so basically they usually have to do a qualifying run where they have to run with another dog, with someone who's a race secretary watching that run to make sure that the dog is going to run clean without interfering with the other dog and is actually chasing the lure and not the other dog. In NOTRA, they have to do a qualifying run that involves at least one turn. So a dog that is experienced in running LGRA, the straight track, isn't automatically qualified for NOTRA because there's no turns involved. But the other way around, you can actually have a dog that starts in NOTRA and runs clean, and LGRA will actually take that as a qualification, so they don't have to do a separate qualifying run.
What about a former racing greyhound, professional racing greyhound that's run multiple races? Do they have to qualify nevertheless?
So in LGRA, they give us more leeway, and it's up to the discretion of the race secretary. And what I usually do is if I have a retired racer that's entering for the first time, I'll actually go to Greyhound data or track info and look up their racing lines from the professional track and see if there were any comments about
Right.
interference. And if it looks like they were clean runners, then I don't make them do a qualifying run. NOTRA just recently changed the rules to where every dog is supposed to do a qualifying run before racing in NOTRA, even if they came off the track.
Sometimes when we have a dog just off the track come out for a LGRA meet, we don't, and I do what Jennifer does. I look up to see if their record, to see if there's any dirty stuff going on, or they got booted or got ticketed on the track. But, and I read all the judges' comments very carefully. But what we'll do is let them have a half run just so that we can show them that the lure is on the ground. Because in the past, we've had dogs, and I had one once that just had been off the track, was still in great shape, and came out of the box and immediately turned left through the and went right through the tape and off the track. So we just let them know that, nope, it's on the ground.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about box training. Do you find that most former racers, even if they've been off the track for some time, will go right into the box like it's riding a bicycle?
Well, they know. As a matter of fact, some people that come just to see what it's about, they'll bring their dog out and be walking their dog around. And the dog, the minute they see that box or hear that box, they know exactly where they are and why they're there. It's really amazing to see. It always kind of does my heart good too. It kind of shows the owners, you think your dog didn't like to race? Come out and see.
Yeah, yeah. How about you, Jennifer? What's been your experience with that?
I find that they all get excited to see the lure and they all love to run. They don't all go eagerly into the box. And
even my box trained, I have some that you have to, no matter how well trained they are, they either want to go over it or around it, or yeah, you got to sometimes just put them in.
Yeah, I tell the story about I have fairly limited amateur racing experience, but we had when the Jacksonville track was open, we went down and took one of the greyhounds we took was she was racing coursing bred, never been to a track, and so her first experience with the box was the first race. We didn't even get there in time to do this. Is before you had to qualify them, and so she puts the brakes on going into the box, acting like you were going to kill her. And she finally went in and ran the race just fine. And each successive program, as you would take her to the box, she was more eager. And so by the last race on Sunday, she was pulling us toward the box.
Yeah.
That's how quickly the learning curve, can, if they're bred to run, how quickly the learning curve can kick in. So she went from, you're killing me, to give me to the box quick.
Yeah. I've raised a lot of puppies, amateur puppies, and I don't put them through the box until they're a little older. And I always like to say, by the time I do box my dogs and close the box, they run through the open box with no problem. But they're so crazy for the lure, they don't care. They just. But I've had such lure. I had one girl that was so insanely lure crazed that she would go in, and the schooling boxes that we use are not wide, they're pretty narrow, and she was not a small girl, and she would manage to spin once or twice. And so what we did for her entire career, and she was a fantastic racer, she was a rock star, but what she did for her, we would put her in backwards, and then she would only spin once and focus.
Now let's talk a little bit about greyhound registration. What's needed in the way of registration and registration information to compete a greyhound in LGRA and NOTRA?
so with the greyhounds, need their NGA information, but you don't necessarily need their actual registration paper. I think the organizations recognize that a lot of these are retired racers and the adopter may not actually have the paperwork. So they'll actually just take what they call the volume and certificate numbers are the registration information that they need. And anyone with a retired racer who is registered with NGA can actually call the NGA office with the dog's racing name and tattoos and can get that information. And as long as you give those numbers to the registrar, then you can run your Greyhound.
Although we just recently had an incident with the registrar in the racing, the one that does the grading guide, that wouldn't accept just ear numbers, which it's always been accepted before, but one of our races, but she would accept, with the popularity of Greyhound data, we just did a copy of her registration from Greyhound data.
Now we're seeing more and more young greyhounds that have been hobbyist bred greyhounds that maybe were, even though they were had racing bloodlines behind them, they were registered with the AKC. If you've got one that's registered with the AKC, what's required?
Yeah,
Just
all you need is the AKC the registration certificate.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about getting started with a greyhound in amateur racing. Jennifer, what do you think is the first best step for somebody who's adopted a former racing greyhound to begin to look into and get started in amateur racing?
I think the best place to start is just to find an event and go out to watch as a spectator, just to kind of get a feel for how things go. Take your dog with you, and most clubs will allow some practice or fun runs, either in between programs or at the end of the meet. And just kind of let the dog do, depending on what kind of physical condition the dog's in. If they have gotten a little sedentary in retirement and aren't in the greatest shape, maybe just start with a little short third or half distance practice. If they're pretty recently retired and still in really good physical conditioning, and let them run the full distance. And I usually recommend starting with LGRA, the straight racing. With a retired racer, the track, since it's usually on a grass field with like a makeshift fence, it's not always the same as what they're used to. So it may still take a little bit of training to get them running the oval. And what a lot of people do is kind of start them like at the final turn and then run them from that. It's called back chaining, and you run them from the final turn to the finish. And then you start a little further back, closer to the starting box, and then finally bring it all the way back and let them run the whole oval. And then you usually run them by themselves first so that they kind of learn the track. And then if they've done that okay, then you can run them with another dog to do a qualifying run.
How about you, Michelle? What do you tell your adopters that adopt a greyhound from your group?
Pretty much the same thing. We really do encourage people to just come and see what it is, let them have a fun run. But, I'm sure Jennifer will agree that keeping greyhounds in particular, in shape for racing and competing, there's work to it. You just can't take them for a half-mile walk once a day or a mile walk once a day and think they're going to be ready to run 3 races. Because as we all know, greyhounds don't think to themselves, well, I got to take it easy because I'm a little out of shape. They are 1,000% all the time. So we do encourage people to come, have a fun run. We talk about how to condition them. And some people are perfectly happy just to come and let them have one fun run, But we also advise people, well, they're a little heavy. You might want to think about, cutting back on their food, giving them some more exercise. And I gladly give them suggestions on how to keep their dog in condition or get their dog in condition, if indeed that's what they want to do. But, always just come and see what it's all about.
I think the point about running 3 races is a good one, because at the professional track, they run 1 race once or twice a week. So retired racing greyhounds are not used to racing 3 times in one day. So that's something I feel like they need to be worked up to, and you have to build their endurance a little bit, even more than what they were used to at the track.
Yeah.
What do you think the maximum age a retired racing greyhound should race at in amateur racing? I agree. I know that will vary to some degree with the individual. But generally speaking, where do you start getting a little bit, I don't know about this?
Yeah,
it really
if they're
depends.
older than 5, again, depending on their condition, but if they're older than 5, I will definitely say, how about just a fun run,
Yeah, I think it depends on the dog. You have some that I think seem like they're more durable and have better stamina. Like that, my first greyhound, she was probably actively competing until 7 or 8. She ran her last lure coursing trial at 8.5. And then after that, I would still let her run at the race meets, but mostly just the straight. And I would only let her run once or twice. I wouldn't run all 3 programs. So I kind of played it by ear, depending on the dog.
Yeah.
I have one right now who the mom to the puppies that I bred, and she does not keep herself in shape in the yard. She does not run if she doesn't have to. So I ran her in a couple meets after she retired from the pro track. And I mean, she raced until she was 4 on the professional track, ran in a few meets, and I pretty much retired her at about 5 after she had the puppies, because she was not one that was easy to keep in shape.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah,
times,
go ahead, Michelle. I'm
I was
sorry.
just going to say, a lot of times we've had some people that have raced their dogs with us for quite a long time, and the dogs are really older, and even though they still get their normal exercise, they're just not in shape. But so what we have a little thing we do with the geriatrics dogs is the owner will stand maybe halfway in the middle of the track and shake the lure rather than have them behind the lure and chase the lure. They run to the lure and then throw it on the ground and let them beat it to death. And that's a big treat for some of the oldies,
Well, now increasingly, I think we're going to see more and more people coming out with puppies, greyhound puppies, as the supply of racers diminishes here in the U.S. and more people turn to hobby breeders to get a greyhound puppy from to keep greyhounds in their lives. What's the let's start with Michelle. You've bred a few in that area. When do you start puppies in their training and so forth for?
Well, I start
racing?
from the time after they've had their first few vaccines. I bring them, and I always have kept more than one from the litters that I've bred, and set up an X-pen where they can see the box, they can catch on to the excitement, they can watch the big dogs. And it's a pain traveling with a bunch of little puppies, but it is so worth it because I always say they're brought up at race meets, and then I start letting them have little tiny baby runs. Maybe pop the lure for them, get them excited, let them tug with the lure. So I start right from the get-go to make them crazy, to get them pretty intense.
It's always everybody loves to watch the puppies run. I've noticed at both race meets and lure coursing that if there's somebody that brings a puppy out to run, everybody stops what they're doing to watch the puppies run because it's so much fun.
Yeah, I have a just 9-month-old puppy now, and she runs the whole course, but I only let her have one, just because I don't ever want to. Well, because she's only 9 months for one thing, but I do let her run the 200 yards, but just once. But I still let her walk around and watch the excitement.
What's the next step after that then? After you've
I will
let her approach a year old.
Yeah, pretty soon I'll let her go through an open box. And I do that for I'm probably slow compared to what some people do, but I don't start them the minute they're a year old.
That's their eligibility age, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, a year old. I never start them at a year old. I kind of do what the track does, really. I do let them start when they're probably over a year anyway. I let them come, I train them through a closed box, but only once, maybe twice over a weekend, but I don't compete them until they're probably 16, 17, 18 months.
Yeah. Well, conservative is good, I've found with greyhounds.
I am slow, and I know a lot of people will say to me, why aren't you entering that dog? And I'm like, when I want and I want them to be really confident too.
Yeah. Jennifer, how about you?
Yeah, just one thing to add. I mean, I don't have any experience with greyhound puppies on amateur racing from the start, but extrapolating my whippet litter was very similar. And I would say the only thing I really did different, or maybe Michelle does do this, she just didn't mention it, is even at home before getting them started on like a lure pull and getting puppies, like, I mean, even 4, 5, 6 weeks old, getting them to chase a toy type the end of a fishing line.
Yeah.
And a little plastic bag. And then that way they kind of, you start them off and kind of cater to that instinct to chase a moving object.
And another thing I do with puppies, and still do with my 9-month-old, is I don't muzzle them right away. Because by the time I do muzzle them, they're so insane for the lure, they don't even care. But I let them carry the lure back. I let them kill the lure. I tug the lure. I run back holding the other end of the lure, the pelt, with them, and let them squeak it and kill it. And I really just try to hone that instinct in them, I don't muzzle them for quite a while.
At your meets, are you seeing yet the emergence of more and more greyhound puppies? Is that happening yet?
No. Brianna Burkhart in Massachusetts had a litter, and that's where my puppy came from. And so she's brought her puppy, and a few people that got puppies from her have been at the meets, but there really isn't anyone in my area that breeds.
How about you, Jennifer? Are you seeing that yet in your area?
I haven't really seen much of that yet. And I mean, part of it is I think it's still early, and also with the pandemic, we haven't had people coming out.
Yeah.
But I mean,
we missed our whole season.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the accoutrements of amateur racing, the prizes and the titles. First of all, let's make sure our listeners understand, is there any gambling in amateur racing?
Not publicly.
What about prize money?
No.
Is it allowed?
I don't know, to be honest. It's never been, I don't know.
It's not allowed in asphalt lure coursing. I know that.
No, I know it's not allowed in lure.
I'm not sure it's even addressed in the rules.
I don't know if it is either.
Yeah. And so what are the typical prizes?
Stuffies, bunnies.
Do you get ribbons?
Yes. Yep.
Trophies? What's the typical trophy for?
The only trophies that we've ever done are for the nationals, and then that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, same with us. I mean, our regular meets, usually the only prizes are stuffed toys. Our
rosettes and
rosettes, ribbons. Some clubs do more creative toys and more creative prizes, like little custom dog dishes that have a little greyhound painted on the side.
Yeah, we have done that in the past, and several years ago when there was a huge, it was so expensive to travel because gas was almost $4 a gallon for a while there. So we would give gas cards to the people that had driven the furthest, or big dog beds to the winner, anything to try to suck those people back up the highway.
Now, what about titles? Let's cover that before we conclude. What are the let's do LGRA first, Michelle. What are the titles that are available there, and how are they earned?
Greyhound Racing Champion is the first title, and that's for 12. You need 12 points. And then the Supreme Greyhound Racing Champion is 30 points. And then from there, it's for every 30 points added on to the 30 is SGRC 2, 3, 4, and a little personal brag. One of my foundation girls, Horsey, was the first Greyhound to have a 3, a 4, and a 5, and her son, Jamie, was the first one to get to 7. And he was 3/4 of a point away from his 8th when he retired.
Oh, wow. Jennifer, how about NOTRA?
Yeah, it's pretty much identical. Just instead of GRC, it's ORC for Oval Racing Champion. The points are the same. It's 12 to get to the ORC, and then the Supreme is SORC, and it's 30 points each. So pretty much the structure is pretty much identical.
Now, my impression is, you all tell me if I'm mistaken here, is that among the performance sports for greyhounds, the racing titles are probably the most difficult to attain, in the sense that they're not heavily participation based. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, in lure coursing, I hate to say, you can just continue to show up and accumulate points, and ultimately you'll probably get that field champion. That may not be the case with oval and straight racing.
Yeah, because if there's only two dogs that show up, that's only 1 point. So that's, and there are some breeds. I mean, it just depends on where you are and entry level at the time. There are a lot of breeds that it takes them forever to knock off a championship.
What's your impression about that, Jennifer?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it definitely is harder than some of the sports where if you just show up enough. But I've also had dogs that had trouble even getting their lure coursing championship because you do have to have, like, in AKC, you have to have majors. In ASPA, you have to have that first or second place. And if you have a dog that can't get that, I mean, I don't think the lure coursing title is a guarantee either. But I do agree that racing is probably harder just because of the way it's structured and the fact that you don't have areas where there's not a lot of competition.
Yeah.
Where do you see amateur racing going? In other words, how's it doing, without regard to the COVID effect? How was it doing before COVID in terms of entries? Was it growing? Was it declining? Staying the same? Where were things standing?
It's hard to say because, like Michelle was saying earlier, it kind of waxes and wanes. And you have, like, back when I was active with it with my first Greyhound in 2008, we had a lot of Greyhounds coming out, and we had a lot of the adoption group that I worked with. We had several members that were active, and we had meets with like 10, 12 Greyhounds pretty regularly. And then a lot of those people, their dogs aged out. They had other things going on in their lives, starting families, what have you. And a lot of them stopped coming out. So then we went through a period where sometimes my dogs were the only Greyhounds there, and it might be like 2 or 3 Greyhounds. But then it seems like right before the pandemic, we had a few meets where we were getting a little more of some of the new adopters coming out. But there's also a population of people that seem to come out like once or twice, and then they're not going to put the effort into traveling a whole distance, and they just kind of drop out after a few meets.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the really hardcore, come out every week, travel, it really seems like it's not a whole lot. And I'm sad to say it almost seems like it is kind of dwindling because we aren't getting a whole lot of new people who are that into it.
Yeah. we've had a good Greyhound increase this past year, post-COVID and also post-Florida dogs, because I did place a lot of young dogs. And so we've been able to entice a few out, and there's a few that seem to be really interested. So our Greyhound entry was really, we had 16 at one meet, and then same in New Jersey, we had 14 in one meet, and that's kind of like the old days, In the early years, we had huge Greyhound entries, and a lot of us owned a lot of dogs, and racing was still going on in New England, and I was placing a lot of young dogs. So we had huge entries. And for our nationals, there have been times when we had, I think, the highest Greyhound entry ever. I think one year we had like 27 Greyhounds entered. And Pat Moran used to come up always and bring his dog. It was a lot of fun. It was great competition. And
Yeah.
it really was a lot of fun. People come from all over the country that you only meet online and joke and compete sort of verbally online. And then just great sportsmanship, a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. Well, may it return to that in full bloom, as COVID wanes. So having listened to the podcast, we hope, and somebody wants to get started in amateur racing, but absolutely knows nothing about how to find an event near them, Jennifer, what would they want to do to begin their research?
I would start with the LGRA and NOTRA websites. They have a list of the events and where they're located. And I will say you may not find an event real close to you. There's parts of the country where you may need to drive several hours to get to a meet, and some places there might not even be anything within a reasonable driving distance. So it really depends on where you're located.
What's the next event in your part of the country, Jennifer?
Probably our first event's, I think, late October, and that tends to be when we start back up when things start to cool down.
That's in Camden, South Carolina.
Yes.
Yeah.
How about you, Michelle?
New Hampshire, we have our next meet in the third weekend of August, and then one in September, and then New Jersey picks up in September, October. October is a really busy month. So and sadly, not everyone travels, that's for sure. Like a lot of the people mid-Atlantic states don't want to drive to New Hampshire. They think we're on the other end of the earth. And but I do I travel to New Jersey all the time because there's a lot, and New Jersey is really kind of like the Mecca right now.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have another show sometime with you both back to talk about some of the great amateur racing greyhounds of history, and we'll tell some stories and some funny times and so forth. But I think this has been a very informative hour for everybody that wants to think about getting started with their greyhound, whether it's a puppy, whether it's a retired racer. In amateur racing, it's a great sport. It's a great way to have a sporting partnership with your greyhound, and we do appreciate your spending an hour with us to tell us all about it.
Thanks, I really have. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And listeners, we'll see you next time on Greyhound Nation.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. You can follow Greyhound Nation wherever you get your podcasts. If you've been listening for a while, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc. You can also write to us via the contact form on our website, greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. We're also on Facebook. Search for our Grey Nation Show page. You can also tweet at us. It's at Grey Nation Show on Twitter. And we're also on Instagram. Just follow at Grey Nation Show. This episode was produced in collaboration with host John Parker. Our theme music was composed and performed by Dimitri Taurus. Our guests this episode were Jennifer Ng and Michele Houghton. To learn more about NOTRA, the National Oval Track Racing Association, visit NOTRA.org. If straight racing is more your Greyhound style, then visit LGRA.org, home of the Large Gazehound Racing Association. I'm Michael Burns, and you've been listening to Greyhound Nation.